Fluffy ran ahead of them down the road. So he ran on down the road, and soon he came to a great hayfield that had 100 men working it. He called one of the men over to him. He said, "Who does this field belong to?" And that man said, "It belongs to the sorcerer." Fluffy said, "Look at me. I'm a cat, wearing boots. I'm talking to you. Aren't you a little bit afraid of me?" The man said, "Yeah." Fluffy said, "Okay, good. Then you're going to do what I tell you. When the king rides by here, he asks you who this field belongs to. I want you and all those other men to tell him it belongs to Count Nicholas, the Great, the Brave, the really, really incredibly handsome Spider-Man, Mr. Truck, Muck the Pharaoh." And the man agreed, and he went to go tell the other men what they were going to say. So Fluffy hurried on down the road, and soon he came to a great wheat field that had 200 men working it. He called one of the men over to him. He said, "Who does this field belong to?" And that man said, "This field belongs to the sorcerer." Fluffy said, "Look at me. I'm a cat, I'm wearing boots, I'm talking to you. Aren't you a little bit afraid of me?" The man said, "Yes." Fluffy said, "Good, then you'll do what I tell you. When the king rides by here and he asks you who this field belongs to, I want you and all these other men to tell him it belongs to Count Nicholas, the Great, the Brave, the really, really incredibly handsome Spider-Man, Mr. Truck, Muck the Pharaoh." The man agreed. So he went to tell all the other men what they were supposed to say. So Fluffy hurried on down the road, and soon he came to a great oak forest that had 300 men working. He called one of the men over to him. He said, "Who does this forest belong to?" And the man said, "It belongs to the sorcerer." Fluffy looked at that man and he said, "Look at me. I'm a cat, wearing boots, I'm talking to you. Aren't you a little bit afraid of me?" Well, the man looked Fluffy up and down. He said, "What's your name, cat?" And Fluffy said, "Fluffy." And the man started laughing at him until Fluffy said, "The ferocious." The man said, Okay. What do you want?" Fluffy said, "Well, when the king rides by here, he asks you who this forest belongs to. I want you and all these other men to tell him it belongs to Count Nicholas, the Great, the Brave, the really, really incredibly handsome Spider-Man, Mr. Truck, Muck the Pharaoh." And the man agreed, so he went to tell all the other men what they were supposed to say. So Fluffy hurried on down the road, and soon he came to a great house. He knocked on the door, and the sorcerer answered. And Fluffy said, "Oh my goodness. I have traveled from so far away just to come and see you because I have heard you can do the most amazing things. I had to see it with my own eyes. I've heard you can transform yourself into other shapes, and I just had to see it. Could you turn yourself into an elephant?" And the sorcerer got big, and he grew great flapping elephant ears and a long elephant trunk. And as soon as he finished transforming himself, Fluffy just fell on the ground and flying. Oh my goodness, that was so incredible. I could not have believed it, but I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. You had to do it again. Do it again. Turn yourself into a lion. And so the sorcerer got a little bit smaller. And he grew lots of fur and a big shaggy mane and a swishing lion's tail. And as soon as he had finished transforming himself, Fluffy said, "Oh, truly, truly it was so incredible. There is no one as amazing as you are. You are such an amazing sorcerer." But you know, those were two very big animals. I don't suppose you can turn yourself into something very small, like a mouse. And so the sorcerer shrunk down and down until he was very small, and he had a little twitching mouse nose, and little twitching mouse whiskers, and a little mouse tail. And as soon as he finished transforming himself, Fluffy jumped on him and ate him up. Meanwhile, the king and Nicholas and the princess were still in the carriage, coming down the road, and they came to that first hayfield that had 100 men working in it. The king called out the window of his carriage, "Who does this field belong to?" And now I need you to be all 100 men in that field. You know what they answered. They said, "This field belongs to Count Nicholas, the Great, the Brave, the really, really incredibly handsome Spider-Man, Mr. Truck, Muck the Pharaoh." Well, the king was pretty impressed. So they continued on down the road. Soon they came to that great wheat field that had 200 men working. The king called out the window of his carriage, "Who does this field belong to?" And 200 men. You guys need to sound like 200 men this time. You know what they answer. This field belongs to Count Nicholas, the great, the brave, the really, really incredibly handsome Spider-Man, Mr. Trump, Mascabello. Well, truly, Count Nicholas owned a lot of land. The king was very impressed, so they continued on down the road, and soon they came to that great oak forest that had 300 men working in it. And the king called out the window of his carriage, "Who does this forest belong to?" This time you guys need to sound like 300 men. You know what they answered. This forest belongs to Count Nicholas, the great, the brave, the really, really incredibly handsome Spider-Man, Mr. Trump, Mascabello. Well, the king thought that Count Nicholas might own more land than he did. They continued on down the road, and soon they came to that great palace. And there, waiting on the front steps for them, was Fluffy. He led them inside the palace and served them tea. They had a lovely afternoon together, talking and drinking tea, and by the end of the afternoon, the king was so impressed with Count Nicholas that he offered him his daughter's hand in marriage, and the princess didn't mind because Count Nicholas was incredibly handsome. So, Nicholas agreed, and Nicholas and the princess and Fluffy all lived in the sorcerer's palace for a long, long time. And when the king died, Nicholas became king, and the princess became queen, and Fluffy became prime minister. So that is the story of Nicholas and Puss.